You think you know everything about Johnny Carson? Think again. Because on March 18, 1983, something happened on The Tonight Show that NBC tried to bury for decades. A guest walked onto that stage and said something so shocking, so deeply personal, that Johnny Carson's carefully constructed public persona shattered in real time, and America watched it happen. The guest wasn't a rival, wasn't a journalist. It was someone Johnny trusted completely. Someone who knew secrets Johnny had spent 30 years hiding, and when those secrets spilled out on live television in front of 20 million viewers, Johnny Carson did something he'd never done before. He froze. Completely, utterly froze. March 18, 1983. Studio One, Burbank, California. Another Friday night taping of The Tonight Show. Johnny was in his element, delivering his monologue about President Reagan's latest speech, making the audience roar with laughter. Everything was running like clockwork. Ed McMahon was doing his trademark laugh. Doc Severinsen's band was hitting every note. The show was perfect. But backstage, something was brewing that would change everything. That night's guest lineup looked safe. A comedian Johnny had worked with for years, an actress promoting her new film, and in the third slot, Dr. Helen Morrison, a psychiatrist who had written a book about television's impact on mental health. Standard stuff, easy interview. Or so Johnny thought. What Johnny didn't know was that Dr. Morrison had a history with him, a history he'd forgotten, a history that was about to explode onto national television. The first two interviews went smoothly. The comedian killed, the actress charmed. Johnny was in complete control, doing what he did best, making it all look effortless. But when Fred de Cordova, the show's director, introduced the final guest, something shifted in the air. Dr. Helen Morrison walked onto the stage. Mid-50s, professional, composed, she shook Johnny's hand, sat down on the couch and smiled. But there was something in her eyes. Something Johnny should have noticed but didn't. Dr. Morrison, Johnny began, settling into his chair with his usual charm. Your book talks about how television affects our psychological well-being. That's fascinating stuff. It is, Johnny, Helen replied calmly. But what's really fascinating is how television personalities affect their own psychological well-being. The studio audience chuckled, thinking it was a setup for a joke. Johnny smiled, not yet sensing danger. Well, I hope I'm doing okay, Johnny said, playing along. Helen's smile didn't waver. Are you, Johnny? Are you really doing okay? Something in her tone made Johnny's smile falter slightly. The audience grew quieter, sensing something was different about this exchange. I'd like to think so, Johnny replied, a little less casually now. Helen leaned forward slightly. Then why don't you tell America about November 15, 1972? Johnny's face went blank. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands, which had been casually resting on his desk, suddenly gripped the edge. Hard. I'm sorry, what? Johnny's voice was barely above a whisper. The studio audience didn't know what was happening, but they knew it wasn't scripted. This wasn't the smooth, controlled Johnny Carson they'd watched for 20 years. This was a man who had just been ambushed. November 15, 1972, Helen repeated, her voice steady and clinical. The night you called me at 3 in the morning from a hotel room in Chicago. The night you told me you couldn't do this anymore. That the fame was destroying you. That you wanted to end everything. Complete silence. 20 million people watching at home went silent. The studio audience held their breath. Ed McMahon's face showed pure shock. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, the man who could handle any situation with a joke and a smile, sat frozen in his chair, unable to speak. Helen Morrison wasn't finished. She sat there calm and clinical, while Johnny Carson looked like a man who'd just been shot on live television. You don't remember me, do you? Helen continued, her voice soft but cutting through the silence like a knife. I was Dr. Helen Baxter back then. I worked at the Psychiatric Crisis Center in Chicago. You called our hotline that night. Johnny's mouth opened but no words came out. His legendary composure, the armor he'd built over 3 decades in television, was cracking in real time. I think there's been some mistake, Johnny finally managed, his voice shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Helen tilted her head slightly. You were in Chicago for a charity event. Your second marriage had just ended. Your son Ricky was struggling with addiction. The pressure of doing the show 5 nights a week was crushing you. And you were alone in that hotel room, drinking, thinking about how easy it would be to just... The audience was paralyzed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something raw and real and terrifying. People in the studio didn't know whether to look away or lean in closer. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, instinctively moving toward Johnny, but Fred de Cordova signaled him to stay back. The cameras kept rolling because nobody knew what else to do. "You talked to me for 2 hours that night," Helen said, her clinical mask slipping slightly, revealing genuine emotion underneath. "You told me things you'd never told anyone, about the panic attacks before every show, about the prescription pills you were taking just to sleep, about how you felt like a fraud because everyone thought you were happy but you were dying inside." Johnny's hands were trembling now, visibly trembling. The man who'd interviewed presidents and movie stars and never shown fear was shaking like a leaf. "Why?" Johnny's voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" Helen's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "Because 11 years ago, I saved your life. I talked you down from that ledge, and I made you promise me something. Do you remember what you promised me?" Johnny shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "You promised that if you were ever in a position to help someone else who was suffering in silence, you would do it, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter what it cost you." Helen reached into her jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. "3 weeks ago, I received this letter. It's from a 16-year-old boy in Ohio who watches your show every night. He wrote to tell me that he's planning to kill himself. And you know what he said?" She unfolded the letter with steady hands. He said, "Everyone sees Johnny Carson smiling every night, and if someone that successful can be happy, then something must be wrong with me. I'll never be okay." The words hit Johnny like a physical blow. You could see it in his face, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his breath caught. "This boy thinks he's alone," Helen continued, her voice breaking now. "He thinks that successful, famous people don't struggle with depression, that mental illness is something shameful to hide. And people like you, Johnny, with your platform and your influence, you have the power to change that. But instead, you keep smiling, you keep pretending, and kids like this one keep dying." Johnny Carson sat there, tears streaming down his face, in front of 20 million viewers. The king of late night was crying on his own show, and for the first time in television history, nobody was reaching for the commercial break button. "I'm sorry," Johnny whispered. Then louder, looking directly at the camera, "I'm so sorry." Helen stood up and walked over to Johnny's desk. She placed the letter in front of him. "You don't need to apologize to me, Johnny, but you do need to tell the truth. For that boy. For everyone watching who thinks they're alone in their pain." Johnny Carson picked up the letter with shaking hands. He stared at it for a long moment, and when he looked up at the camera, America saw something they'd never seen before. Not Johnny Carson the performer, Johnny Carson the human being. "I need to tell you all something," Johnny said, his voice raw and unsteady. "And I need to do it now, because if I don't, I might never have the courage again." The studio was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Ed McMahon had tears streaming down his face. The crew stood frozen behind their cameras, nobody daring to move. "Dr. Morrison is right," Johnny continued. "November 15th, 1972. I was in Chicago, alone in a hotel room, and I was planning to kill myself. I had the pills lined up on the nightstand. I had written letters to my sons. And the only reason I'm sitting here today is because I picked up the phone and called a crisis hotline instead." The admission hung in the air like smoke. 20 million people were processing the fact that Johnny Carson, the man who'd made them laugh for 2 decades, had once been so broken he wanted to die. "I've struggled with depression my entire adult life," Johnny said, the words tumbling out now like a dam had broken. "I take medication for it. I see a therapist twice a week. And there are nights, even now, when I go home after making all of you laugh, and I sit in my empty house and wonder if any of it matters." He looked down at the letter again. "This boy who wrote to Dr. Morrison. He thinks he's alone. He thinks something's wrong with him because he can't just be happy. And I need him to know. I need everyone watching to know that he's not alone, that I understand exactly how he feels." Johnny turned to Helen, who was still standing beside his desk. "You were right to do this. I've been hiding for 11 years, pretending I had it all together, and maybe that has hurt people. Maybe people needed to know that you can be successful and still struggle, that you can make others happy and still be sad yourself." Helen nodded, her own eyes wet with tears now. "That's all I wanted, Johnny. For you to use your voice." "There's more," Johnny said, looking back at the camera. "Something else I need to say. I've been married 3 times. 3 times I promised to love someone forever. And 3 times I've failed. You want to know why? Because I didn't love myself. Because I was so busy being Johnny Carson that I forgot how to be John." Ed McMahon couldn't hold back anymore. He walked over and put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. "No words. Just presence. Just support. My son Ricky, Johnny's voice broke on the name. He's battling addiction right now, and for years I blamed myself. I thought I'd failed him as a father, but my therapist helped me understand something. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to be honest about your own struggles, to show them it's okay to not be okay. Johnny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smearing the tears across his face. He didn't care how he looked anymore. If you're watching this right now, and you're in pain, if you're thinking about hurting yourself, I want you to know something. Johnny leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera with an intensity nobody had ever seen from him. Your pain is real. Your struggle is valid, and asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. He held up the letter. This boy in Ohio, if you're watching, please call the number Dr. Morrison is about to give. Please don't give up, because I promise you, I swear to you, it can get better. I'm living proof that you can survive the darkest nights and find reasons to keep going. Helen pulled out a business card and held it up to the camera. The National Crisis Hotline, she said clearly. The number is on your screen right now. It's free, it's confidential, and there are people waiting right now who want to help you. Johnny stood up from his desk, something he rarely did during interviews. He looked out at his studio audience, at the crew, at the cameras broadcasting to millions. I'm done pretending, he said simply. I'm done acting like I have all the answers. The truth is, I'm just a guy trying to figure it out, same as everyone else. And if being honest about that helps even one person feel less alone, then this was worth it. The aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. The moment the show ended, the NBC switchboard exploded. Thousands of calls flooded in, so many that the system crashed within minutes. People weren't calling to complain, they were calling to say thank you. Letters poured into NBC studios by the tens of thousands, people sharing their own stories of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, people who'd been hiding their pain for years, suddenly finding the courage to speak up because Johnny Carson had spoken first. The boy in Ohio, the one whose letter Helen Morrison had read, called the crisis hotline that night. He talked to a counselor for 3 hours. Years later, he would write to Johnny again, telling him he'd graduated college, that he was engaged, that he'd become a counselor himself. But the cost to Johnny was severe. NBC executives were furious. They'd lost millions in advertising revenue because Johnny had gone off script. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Network lawyers worried about liability. For 3 days, there was serious talk about firing Johnny Carson. Then the ratings came in. 43 million viewers, the highest in Tonight Show history. And more importantly, the demographic data showed people who'd never watched before were tuning in. Young people, people who'd felt alienated by traditional late-night television. The advertisers came crawling back. The network executives changed their tune. Suddenly, Johnny's breakdown was being called groundbreaking, revolutionary, important. Johnny saw through it all. In a meeting with NBC brass 2 weeks later, he made his position clear. I'm not doing this for ratings. What happened that night happened because it needed to happen. And if you want me to keep hosting this show, you need to understand that I'm going to be honest from now on. NBC agreed. They had no choice. Helen Morrison became a regular guest after that, appearing every few months to talk about mental health, to share resources, to have honest conversations. Johnny would participate openly, never pretending to have all the answers. Helen later revealed in her memoir that she'd agonized for weeks about whether to confront Johnny on live television. She knew it could destroy his career, but the 16-year-old boy in Ohio was running out of time, and desperate measures were needed. Johnny's relationship with his sons improved dramatically. Ricky Carson, who'd been estranged from his father for years, called him the day after the broadcast. They talked for hours, really talked, for the first time in a decade. Dad, Ricky said, I always thought you had it all together, that I was the family failure. Knowing that you struggled too makes me feel less alone. That phone call meant more to Johnny than any Emmy, any rating, any standing ovation. The episode won a Peabody Award. In his acceptance speech, Johnny said something that became legendary. We spend so much time trying to entertain people that we forget the most powerful thing we can do is simply be honest with them. Johnny continued hosting for 9 more years after that March night. He remained open about his mental health struggles, normalizing therapy, medication, and asking for help. He used his platform to bring awareness to suicide prevention,
funding research, supporting hotlines, saving lives. When Johnny died in 2005, thousands of letters poured into his estate, not about his comedy or his interviews. People writing to say, "Johnny Carson saved my life by admitting he'd almost lost his own." The Tonight Show episode from March 18, 1983, is now preserved in the Library of Congress. Mental health organizations still use clips from it in training material. It's shown in psychology classes, medical schools, crisis intervention programs, because sometimes the most important thing a person with a platform can do isn't make people laugh, it's make them feel less alone. Johnny Carson's darkest secret became his greatest legacy. And that 16-year-old boy in Ohio, he's in his 50s now. He still has Johnny's response letter framed on his office wall. Below it, a plaque with 7 words. "You're not alone, I promise. Keep going."